Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Welcome back to the Australian Retirement Podcast. I'm here today with the always sharp-looking Drew Meredith. Hello, mate. Great to see you.
Good to be here. That's a nice compliment to start the morning.
You're welcome. Do you have a stylist or something? What's the deal
kind
here?
of.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. I know the answer.
That's one thing to invest in retirement, stylist.
Yep.
And a very simple wardrobe.
Okay, well, that must be the trick.
Less colours, the better.
Well played, mate. Well, we've got lots of cool questions to get through, but the purpose of this, of course, is to start addressing some of the amazing questions that we've been getting through on the chat and through the meeting for the Australian Retirement Podcast. So, firstly, to those of you who have answered or have submitted questions, thank you. We're going to do our best over the next little while to really make some progress into these and be able to answer your questions for you. So please keep submitting those, and hopefully we can add as much value to you as possible.
And this part really excites us as well. And we're going to bring some questions that get in the office anonymised every day, even from our own advisors within our teams, but also bring up some topical events that happen during the week. I think that's always valuable. You know, we see term deposit rates cut. We see another inflation result. What do these things mean for retirees? That's the premise of this. So send us your questions on anything retirement related.
Agreed.
Travel included.
Agreed. So I'm going to get started with my own question just to warm us up a little bit. I want to make sure that you're ready. So Drew, let's go. If you had the choice to fight either a duck the size of a horse or 100 horses the size of ducks,
Oh, the 100 scares me. I was watching Moana today. There's a shapeshifter. So I'd have to go with the duck the size of a horse.
Whoa. Coming at you with its big beak.
Yeah, definally.
That's a big undertaking. You could punt the little ducks. Or the little.
Not really. I think most of my nightmares come from being bitten by 100 things.
But what could a tiny horse do the size of a duck? Like,
there's 100 of them.
You wouldn't want to fall. You have to stay on 2 feet.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. We know we're good at that.
All right. Well, I feel like we're ready now.
100 versus 1. I feel like 1-on-1 on a chance.
I don't think you are, mate. It would be so big.
I'm overestimating. Again, we'll relate this back to overconfidence bias.
All right. Let's get started with a real question from the Annual Leave Bandit. Great title. And thank you for the kind words, mate. The question here is... And
general advice only. This is why we're having fake names. All these questions, we don't tell us too much about yourself, and we'll we'll anonymize them as much as possible. But this is very giving you general ideas of your options and the implications of every question that comes through.
Absolutely. To be clear, please don't sue us if you choose to fight a duck the size of a horse. That's your choice.
Also general advice.
That was absolutely general advice. Okay, so the question is, I'm contemplating taking both a step down and a step back from a management role to a more junior part-time position as part of my transition to retirement. Cool. I've accumulated a mad amount of annual leave and long service leave over 12 months and cannot seem to work out if it's better to cash out this leave before stepping down and taking the tax hit, or just waiting for the drop in value and keeping the leave but at a lower salary level.
This sounds like a young person too.
Yeah,
a mad amount
this
of
person
leave.
speaks like a young person.
Yeah.
Cool.
And you did miss the first line there too.
Oh, yeah.
Super excited for this new podcast.
I said thanks for the kind words. Yeah. All right. We'll bask in all the kind comments that we're getting. No problem. So keen to understand the process of how you would go about working it out and what path is best. Rip question.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to start on, and there's a little bit of complexity around it, but it's a question that we get more and more often in that transition to retirement period, particularly where people are looking to retire before they've turned 60. And we've talked about in previous episodes that, you know, when you can access this superannuation is at 60 years of age. As a general rule, your annual leave is paid out at the salary that you're on at the time of leaving or resigning. But when it comes to long service leave, and long service leave is usually is part of a redundancy or like an end of work payment as well. Long service leave is a little bit more complicated. Is that right?
It is a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So let's start with annual leave.
Yep.
So the first implication for you, Bandit, is that if you are going to change roles and go into a lower hourly rate, then the extension of that is your annual leave is going to be paid out at a lower hourly rate.
Good for the employer if you're a small business owner.
Happy days. One of the good things that can happen, though, if you have your leave taken out as an income stream instead of as a lump sum at the end, is that Your income stream annual leave and indeed long service leave has leave loading attached to it. So those annual leave days, you're also accruing more annual leave and long service leave.
This is the crux of the question, isn't it? Yeah.
And you're also getting your superannuation payments.
On top of that, yeah.
Whereas at the end of your days, if you say, all right, I'm going to retire now, I'm leaving the company and I want that annual leave and long service leave as a lump sum, that won't typically attract superannuation or the leave loading. And that's a pretty healthy amount. Like you add those two things, and that's about a 20% uplift in what you're receiving. So as a house rule for our members, we say, especially if you're reducing your hours as you approach retirement on a set day, we would rather you fill in all of the hours that you've taken away. Like let's extinguish as much annual leave and long service leave the traditional way. Let's use
Work
it while you're at the employer.
And have a day off a week.
Correct. Yeah. And keep moving that needle right up to the point where you get to D-Day, and then anything that's left you take as a lump sum.
And I think the other part of this question is the ability to spread it over multiple financial years. So while, as you said, from the initial perspective, you're missing out on, say, 20% in additional payment by not dragging it out or enjoying it over an extended period of time. But what you're also doing if you take that single payment is putting that taxable amount into a single financial year. So you probably work that year, then you're about to get a big payment in one lump sum of leave, and you're going to pay a higher tax rate most likely. So the benefit of being able to spread it over multiple years is, in addition to that 20%, you may be able to have a lower average tax rate if it's over across 30 June, 1 July in any given year.
Spot on. Yeah, well said. The one last consideration that I'd add for you, Bandit, is not sure if it's applicable to you. You sound like a fairly young individual. But having said that, for some of you, you might be in this position where perhaps you don't have either the luxury or the desire to want to taper your work. You're going to work full time right up until a set day, and then you're going to call it a day. In that scenario, you might have an employer that's kind enough to say, all right, you're going to be finishing work on the 1st of March, and you've got 4 months of leave. So if it's okay, I'll just pay you from the 1st of March until the 1st of July, and you can have all of that money as income.
Yeah.
That's a great deal, and of course the benefit is, again, you're getting super, you're getting some of those entitlements, so that's good. But if you are on the cusp of age pension, if you're retiring after 67 and you would otherwise qualify, in my experience, you're sometimes better taking the hit, losing the entitlement to the superannuation payment and also the annual the leave loading on that income.
Yep.
Because from the day that you retire and your income has altogether stopped, you're now going to be getting age pension of, let's call it $1,000 a fortnight, which can't happen until that income stream leave has been paid out.
Yeah.
So there can be a calculation here, depending on how much age pension you're entitled to and the like, of saying, well, perhaps it's better for me to just call it a day and become entitled to that benefit the day after I receive that lump sum, versus dragging this out.
Yeah, and I think if there's 3 rules or 3 steps you're going to take, it's what's my benefit worth now, and if I make the change. So that's just, as you said, how can I extract the most benefit from it? The second one would be, what's my tax rate if it's this year or next financial year, and when do I plan to retire? Like that could be, for some people, it's a teacher and they say, I want to retire at the end of the school year. For some people, it's an accountant. I want to retire after the tax returns are done. So that can play a big part in how you time this. And I think for everything, it's good to have like this framework of questions you want to ask to come out with the outcome at the bottom.
Yeah, completely agreed. All right, let's move on. On Dad's behalf is this question. How to pay off your mortgage quicker in order to have a debt-free retirement when in your 60s. Drew, what do you reckon?
It's a good question, and there'd be different answers depending on whether you're still working or whether you're involved in work or gainful employment. So if you're looking at it as a younger person, I'll try and answer it from both perspectives, using things like offset accounts and increasing your mortgage repayments. So as they've said, if you do fortnightly versus monthly repayments, you end up paying off more and paying less interest. Using an offset account over 5 or 10 years can help in making sure you're paying off principal more than you are interest. So they're like the little steps, as well as, if you're getting close to retirement, making an extra payment on top of the repayments that you've already agreed to. That's like that. I see that as kind of 101, paying down your mortgage. When it gets, I think that's actually is where the question's shaped from, isn't it? How do you in order to have a debt-free retirement when you're in your 60s? So yeah, it is very much doing those small things that help ensure that you're paying less interest than your 30-year loan suggests you should be over its term.
Agreed. And I'll find this somewhere because it won't be hard to find, and I'll drop it in the show notes. please, if you're listening to this and it's all the same to you, you want to be paying your loan at the highest frequency that it can be paid. It is shocking how much of a difference it makes to have your loan paid off on a weekly basis.
Yeah, the amortization calculator.
Rather than a monthly basis. It's amazing. And even though you're making the same minimum repayment, the reason why that's having a bigger effect is because in scenario, let's just use simple numbers of like $1 million loan and 5% home loan rate. Well, that means that it's going to cost you $50,000 in interest every year. And so if you're making that payment monthly, that means for month one, you owned $1 million of debt all the way up until the 30th day, and then you had interest to pay, and then you had your repayment. Whereas in scenario 2, if you're paying weekly, then you owned $100,000 million all the way up until the 7th day, and then it was a lower figure. And then on the 14th day, it was lower, and that keeps happening. And the compounding impact of those micro adjustments is so big that if you're paying on a monthly basis, and again, it's set to minimum, for God's sake, make it weekly. It's truly free money. So that's one for me.
And I think one thing to think about is you don't always have to pay off your entire mortgage before you retire. It is completely normal for people to use their superannuation to retire. And we know that owning your property outright and not paying rent in retirement offers considerably more comfortable lifestyle.
Yes.
Than the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We often will sit down with people who might have a higher mortgage than they would like. Maybe it's because there's been a marital separation. Maybe financially, just things haven't gone to plan. And so I'm 60 or 62, and I tend to retire in 5 years, let's say. But I need to do two things right now. I need to grow my retirement balance, and I need to pay down my mortgage and juggle that balance. And we often speak to that concept of a crossover period. There's going to be a certain point whereby your retirement assets, which of course are moving up and down, but your retirement assets are going to exceed your mortgage. And from this point onward, you're forging retirement savings.
Yep.
So understanding how both of those intersect can be really valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And next question probably comes into contributions as well from Bring Back the Ducats. I'm not exact. We always have to. Am I missing something? No, we'll find it out.
Might be.
Yeah, we'll do a bit of research. So, the more niche the question and names, the better. Mm-hmm. And I believe we're going to give away. Maybe we'll give away a book to the best question name too. That's what we do on 2 cents every week.
Yep.
Yeah.
In that, it's a coin, isn't it? A ducat.
Oh, yes.
It's a European coin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. I thought I had a good memory of niche things, unimportant things. You have even better memory.
It's probably some obscure soccer team or something like that, but who knows?
And this is a good example of, what can be overcomplicating matters sometimes, this question. So Bring Back the Ducats asks, is it potentially a good idea to have a secondary super fund account exclusively for the non-concessional contributions? So non-concessional contributions being the after-tax contributions that you're making separate to your super guarantee and what your employer makes. Mm-hmm. So 2 super funds, do we do it?
Sometimes, but quite rarely. The advantage that you might be looking at here, mate, is that if you...
it's not really for you, is it?
No, it's not for you. Yeah, when you put money in as a non-concessional contribution, that goes into superannuation as what's called tax-free components. Whereas the traditional contributions that you claim a tax deduction, like your salary sacrifice, your employer's SG contributions, they're all what we call taxable. Now, when you retire, whether you've got taxable component super or tax-free component super, when you convert that to an allocated pension, which we've talked about before, you're still going to pay no tax. So everything is actually going to operate exactly the same way. The, dare I say, only material benefit, the real benefit, is that if you are to pass and that money is to go to a non-tax beneficiary, and to be clear, the most common non-tax beneficiary would be adult children.
Yep.
So if you have a partner and the intention is the money is going to be bequeathed to the partner, taxable, tax-free components are totally irrelevant.
Yep.
But if really confidently the money's going to go to adult children, and that could be a combination of being single, firstly, and having adult kids. It could also be perhaps you've got a retirement balance that's so high that you're likely to outlive it.
Yep.
In that scenario, then there can definitely be some merit, because the taxable component money would all be typically taxed at when it gets paid out around 20% for simplicity, yep. Whereas the tax-free component would be 0. So we have this compare the pair scenario. We have 2 individuals who unfortunately or former individuals who have passed. One has $500,000 of taxable component super. One has $500,000 of tax-free component super. Scenario A, this individual is going to get about $400,000 down to their adult children.
Yep.
Scenario B, this individual is going to get the full $500,000 to the adult children. So in a rare scenario where you are on the cusp of retirement and starting to think about, well, where does this money go eventually, there can be some merit. You look at, when it comes to taxable and tax-free components, I look at them kind of like cordial and water. Like once you put them in, together, you can't separate them anymore.
Fixed percentage once you draw a pension, every dollar you bring out is a portion of both of those.
Bingo.
Yeah. I think this, without going into too much detail, one of the benefits of using a self-managed super fund is the ability to not deliberately quarantine, but to quarantine future contributions. So something you can do in a self-managed super fund that you can't do in traditional industry or corporate super plans is control the timing of you control the timing, for lack of a better word, of your pension. So if it's the case of an industry fund and you've got a pension that's already operating, you have to contribute and create a new pension, and more paperwork, more fees, more accounts. In an SMSF, you could be running 7 different pensions, all which you'd have to draw the normal 4% from. But if you've commenced a pension immediately after putting a non-concessional contribution in, you could draw a pension solely from that non-concessional contribution balance.
Spot on.
Without all the rigmarole and paperwork that comes around it. This is one of the benefits of flexibility of SMSFs. And you go ahead.
Noting that you'll also have the you also have the advantage of, for example, taking the minimum from the tax-free component,
exactly,
and then all of your pension payments, all your retirement assets, you fund from the taxable component to basically erode that money first and be left with that clear water tax-free component.
That was the extension of that, definitely. And then, the bigger question, I'd put it back at the top level of this, would be that what's the cost and fees of running 2 superannuation accounts? If it's 2 SMSFs, it's probably going to be expensive. But any other fund, you've usually got a base level of fees. So is the higher fees or duplicated fees offsetting the benefit that you're getting?
Yes, agreed. And also to add that there are things, it depends how high your super balance is, but as you approach retirement, there are some strategies, cash out and recontributions and things like that, where you can withdraw that cordial stuff, the taxable component, and get it straight back in as clear tax-free component. So in most cases, this is going to be doing too much. It's going to be unnecessary. There might be some very rare cases where it makes sense, but as a house rule, you're probably overthinking this.
Yeah, and most people just aren't too worried about their kids paying a bit of extra tax. No, honestly, most people don't want to pay any tax at all. So the strategy around drawing more pension from the accounts with the higher taxable component is one we look at, and I'm sure you do every year when we're helping clients finish off their SMSF tax returns. It's always about how do you pull out as much taxable component as possible within the rules.
Let's move on to Jenny Wren. I presume that is a Paul McCartney reference. So well played, one of my favourite artists.
Much better at these references.
What my area of concerns are that my partner and myself are 8 years in age difference. He has retired age 70 and I'm semi-retired age 62, presumably working 3 days a week. I need a plan going forward so that I don't retire too late before we can enjoy our retirement together. This is a really interesting one, isn't it? It's that,
for the old age difference,
lifestyle balance of especially when one member of a couple is retired and saying, I want to go to Tuscany, and the other one saying, okay, well, I've still got my own financial goals. This can be tricky.
Yeah, and I'd always start with, let's not even talk about financials, but say, can you retire right now? Do you have enough capital saved up, and are you able to live the life? Maybe if you haven't done enough research and educated, maybe you're in a position where you can. That's on the financial side. So if you can, well, why you keep working? But maybe I'm just oversimplifying this question. And the second one is, do you also want to keep working?
Yes.
And I think that's an important one to have in this case as well, because sometimes the work that we do is for the network and for the social activity that comes with it. So thinking about those questions before you start delving into retiring later, and essentially outside of that, it becomes, are you getting the most out of the assets that you have?
Yeah.
Is the simplest way to think about it. And, as we keep talking about, experiences and spending time are something we value, and you're clearly valuing that. So maybe it's about informing yourself so you're actually able to make that decision now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, particularly with the way this question's worded. I need a plan for going forward so I don't retire too late before we can enjoy our retirement together. That's obviously that's the thing that you most want. That's the pain that you most want to avoid of not having those high quality times together. And I say this with the respect that's intended, but of course, as you move, your husband's 70 or your partner is 70.
And retired, so assumingly either has pension or has their own assets.
That's right, yeah. And as they, like from 70, hopefully they have many years of high quality life and they're able-bodied for a really long time, but the reality is that it might be a little bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, already there's a life expectancy mismatch here in the sense that women typically live longer than men to the tune of around 5 years, and that also flows in terms of health expectancy too. So it does seem like the time that you're spending together is really precious, and I think that in terms of there probably do need to be some compromises made here with respect to how can you reduce your hours to enjoy as much of that high quality time as possible while still having a high level of confidence that you're going to be able to live life on your own terms and retire the way that you wanted.
Yeah, and I think it's just the simple answer is just informing yourself, and you're starting to do that by listening clearly. So getting an understanding of what you've got, what you need, and actually setting a plan. Maybe it's retire at 63, 64, and you only have to work 1 or 2 more years. But a lot of the time that requires getting advice from multitude of sources, but informing yourself and being in control of that decision. And we could pivot next to hopeful Heather. Mm-hmm. I believe that question name is. There's is there any niche musical reference there? Not that I can tell. And we'll keep it broad. It's more about someone being in their early 50s, never owned a principal place residence or an investment property, and starting to think about housing. What do we do from here? I'm assuming this question is about, should I be buying a house? Should I be buying an investment property? What's the best approach, or what do people typically do in this situation?
Yeah, thanks so much for submitting the question, Heather. I
gave you the difficult one. Yeah.
This question actually really hit me in the feels because I've lived this life with my own parents, and it's a really, really, really tricky spot. My family had a really interesting financial upbringing in the sense that when I was very young, we were flush with money and life was, at least financially, life was really good. And then unfortunately a combination of things happened and some poor health and so on. And then financially things really deteriorated. And from probably about 6 or 7 years old, from then on, money was extremely scarce, and we were in and out of rentals for all the way through. And the thing where this really hit me is that, like, I've seen firsthand that if you haven't purchased a principal place of residence and you're moving into that retirement phase, as my parents were as they moved into their own retirement, it gets bloody hard.
Yeah.
And it's tragic, but there's some really meaningful and unfortunately really confronting statistics around income poverty rates of retirees based on housing and marital status. I'll drop some of this stuff into the show notes because I took the liberty of looking at this beforehand. For example, I'm looking here from stats from the OECD, which are saying that if you're a single renter as a retiree, your income poverty rate is about 60%.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a single homeowner, your income poverty rate is around about 14%. There's
no more evidence in like the last 2 or 3 years where rental costs have shot up significantly along as interest rates have as well.
Yeah.
So incredibly challenging situation. And I don't think there is a simple answer, is there? Shifting and a lot of it's hard to provide general advice on this, I think, because you kind of want to get personal.
Yeah.
Like, where's family, where's life, if you're able to reduce the cost of housing, then sure, it might make sense. Yeah. But, putting in a mortgage in a capital city at the moment is, I think, almost a guarantee to income poverty. It's kind of 51 an average super. Yeah.
This is one of the primary problems that we have with the age pension is that the age pension assumes home ownership.
Yeah.
So it assumes minimal housing costs of retirement. Around about 5% is modelled within the income and expenditure.
Yeah.
Which, of course, for a retiree for a non-home retiree is going to put you so far behind the 8 ball. So, as you've said, it does become really personal because it's what you do here is challenging. And Heather, I'm sorry to say that the situation that you're describing here is one that where you're going to have some difficult decisions to make, whether that's a combination of accepting that my retirement is going to be subdued, or alternatively decisions in terms of right now, I'm going to have to make some really conscious efforts to significantly improve my income and put myself in a position where
I'll move further away.
I can buy a home or something along those lines. But I wouldn't normally do this, but this one hit me to the point where, Heather, if you are listening to this, feel free to hit me up personally. I'd be very happy to have a chat with you, just at a high level, about where you're at and perhaps point you in the right direction a little bit more. So don't be afraid to reach out. And it is a tricky spot for you, but it is amazing that you're reaching out now. 51 is not too late. You do have a really healthy amount of time to make some important decisions here. And the fact that you're listening to financial content and that's such a huge thing to put your best foot forward and position yourself for a comfortable retirement.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the next one's got almost a flow on of that question. I'm going to try and paraphrase this. It's quite a long explanation. It gets to the point of being quite personal.
Now to be clear, this is from Naughty Nana.
Naughty Nana.
Now, which I'm choosing to take this in sort of like the bad Santa type way.
Yeah.
So it's got that connotation to it. It could have a different one.
Are we mad? Is the question. I mean, yeah, it is the question. So there's a bit of a statement we're talking about. So both around 60, have still reasonably good incomes, significant assets have been established, but renting rather than paying off a mortgage. And they're asking themselves a very similar question, which is, are we mad thinking we could go and buy a house and a mortgage at the moment? And from the context, the mortgage isn't overly significant in terms of, what we hear about as $1 million mortgage these days, and that costs you, the average house price in Melbourne, I think, is like $800,000. So, and Sydney, I don't even want to talk about. So the question here, and let's not go too much into the buy or rent. It's more about, are there ways to grow our super and pay off a mortgage as quickly as possible?
Yeah, there are. We spoke just before about that concept of a crossover point.
And they're 60 and still working. Still
working. They've got an SMSF with about 400K in it. So there's some good things happening in your financial life. So I think this speaks to that idea of a crossover point. Depending on what sort of asset you want to buy and the level of mortgage that you need to take to buy that asset, if we were looking at this case, our business, the philosophy that we'd approach is to say, well, how are we going to get you to a time in the future where you have enough of a crossover that you can self-fund your retirement?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that would probably come down to, again, what sort of mortgage size do you want? How quickly can you get on top of that mortgage? Or conversely, how quickly can you grow your retirement asset base to be confident that at retirement day, our day, you're going to be able to pay it off and, again, still have enough?
Yeah, it's probably a different question if rates were at 2%. If rates were at 2%, it wouldn't even be a question. There's no issue of retaining and maintaining a mortgage, even if you've retired at a 2% interest repayment. But when it's at 6%, and the repayments have tripled in the last 2 years, it becomes a very different question. And it is exactly that balance. So there's simple ways to think about it. If we've talked about there's been discussions about help versus superannuation, all kinds of other options. But the after-tax return, so if you gross up the amount of your interest rate to determine essentially what guaranteed return you're getting by paying off your mortgage rather than investing, and if you believe or you're comfortable accepting the risk that you can generate a higher return than that, that's where we see the most simple. But it'd also be, if you're able to get the tax benefit and contribute aggressively into superannuation, view it as some point you'll be able to pay off that mortgage and do it quite quickly.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to how much flexibility you want and when do you want. So no view to retire in the foreseeable future. So in that instance, it can give you more flexibility and you're not as worried about maintaining that debt. So it may be an opportunity to more aggressively accelerate your superannuation balance in that tax-effective environment with a view that you're paying it down when you need to.
Yeah, agreed. Embedded into this question too is that this comment about there's an opportunity by buying a house to get out of the rental treadmill, which chews up lots of money every week. And so it's that question of, are we better not paying the rent and instead owning the asset? Now there's based on the numbers that are here, which indicate that if you were to buy the house, you'd have a relatively low mortgage, then it seems to me at face value that you're probably going to be better doing this. not necessarily from a financial perspective. I mean, like the finances are probably going to stack up with the limited visibility we have here, just because your mortgage repayments on a loan of, perhaps 250K are going to be less than 850 a week. So already, at least from a cash flow sense, you're not being penalized there. But looping back momentarily to the conversation we were just having, which is that if you go into your retirement as a non-homeowner, it's very tricky, and it requires, frankly, a completely different set of modeling around how you're going to self-fund your retirement, and a much more conservative element, because the worst case scenario for a homeowner in retirement is that you've burned through all of your superannuation assets and now you're on the age pension. But as we just discussed, that's reasonably well designed for people who own a home. Plus you've got, again, hopefully in the long term, we'll have better options around reverse mortgages and some of those sorts of things so that they become more competitive. But if you are looking down the barrel of being a non-homeowner, the worst case scenario is that you move, again, you burn through your retirement assets and then you end up on an age pension, except you have this rent, and that rent which just continues. So like it's just like a boa, like this python boa constrictor around your finances. It's not going to go away, and your quality of life, or you risk having a really, really subdued quality of life in a financial sense because of the sheer cost.
And I think the highlight from a lot of these questions, or the takeaway, is that we could probably do an episode on each one. We can get into a lot of detail. We appreciate them. We appreciate whether they're niche, specific, totally broad. Hopefully we're giving you two different perspectives on it, two, similar levels of following the same legislation, but hopefully two different perspectives. So I encourage everyone to send through as many questions as they can, topic ideas, anything that worries them in retirement. Welcome those questions. Send them through. I think click on the link in the show notes, or even email us directly. I think our emails are out there in the ether, and I think it's been I really enjoyed doing this Q&A and getting it out with our enjoying and spreading the experience and all the questions we get.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a genuine pleasure to get these questions coming through, and it's lovely to be answering them for you all. So thank you, and please keep them coming.
Good to be with you again.
And you, mate.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.